a new Alfa Romeo being developed for sports car racing by Consalvo Sanesi. The Disco Volante was a reality. First held in 1927, it was the inspiration of four Italian enthusiasts: Count Amo Maggi, Franco Marzotti, Giovanni Canestrini and Renzo Castagneto. They devised the grand concept of a race around Italy. From Brescia in the north to Rome in the south and back, the distance was conveniently 1,000 miles. Count Amo Maggi was the patron and driving force behind the race. (1953) was one of the great years for sports car racing, with the involvement of most of the major sports car constructors. The course was altered little over the years, remaining essentially a big loop. From Brescia in the north to Rome in the south and back, the distance was conveniently 1,000 miles. The Aston Martin team stayed at Casa Maggi, where life is pleasant and almost feudal in style. Following the team's renaissance in 1952, 3 DB3s were entered for Reg Parnell, George Abacassis and Peter Collins, a blend of youth and experience. Alfa Romeo had entered their Disco Volante coupes for Fangio, Carl Kling and Consalvo Sanesi. With their powerful 3.6-litre 6-cylinder engines and independent suspension, they were highly regarded. Lancia entered 4 of their new 3000cc coupes, to be driven by Taruffi, Biondetti, Bonetto and Umberto Maggioli. Double overhead camshaft V6 engines developed 200 horsepower. Ferrari fielded a vast team which included Farina, Villaraci, the Marzotto brothers, Castellotti, the American Tom Cole and the British driver Mike Hawthorne. Altogether, 26 Ferraris were entered. The works cars used either the 4.1 or 3-litre V12 engines. As Sterling Moss leaves the line in the Jaguar, the crowd prepares to cheer on the Lancias, Ferraris, Alfas and Maseratis. The 1953 Mille Miglia had all the ingredients of a great race. The early retirements of Luigi Villaraci and Farina dented Ferrari's hopes. Both were battling with Consalvo Sanesi's Alfa Romeo in the early stages of the race until Villaraci stopped with brake problems. Sanesi's performance was masterly, leading at record speed in Verona and Ravenna and reaching Pescara, 394 miles from Brescia, at an average of 110 miles an hour. He'd been nominated by the communist unions to drive for Alfa Romeo, but unfortunately had to retire from the race shortly afterwards. Farina then led for a short while before leaving the road at L'Aquila. This left Kling in the lead at Rome at an average of 97 miles an hour from Fangio and Giannino Marzotto. Jaguar's Mille Miglia was a disaster. In each case, the effects of the rough roads on the non-independent rear suspension meant that all 3 cars retired. Aston Martin started off well, all 3 cars passing through the refuelling stop at Ravenna. Collins, 12th at Pescara, had taken 4 places by the time he reached Rome. Meanwhile, Kling, who had led for Alfa Romeo at Rome, crashed on the mountain pass between Rome and Siena. This let Fangio into the lead from Giannino Marzotto's Ferrari. But while crossing the Apennines, the steering on Fangio's car began to fail. A damaged track rod meant that he only had steering on one front wheel. Marzotto went into the lead, which he was to hold to the end of the race. That Fangio was able to finish second was remarkable, only 12 minutes behind after 1,000 miles. Mille Miglia. Since its very inception, this had been the place where Alfa had excelled. Back in the great days of Varzi and Nuvolari and throughout the 30s, the only driver to break the Italian domination was Rudolf Caracciola in a Mercedes-Benz. Britain's Jaguar and Healey, with Aston Martin, challenged the new king of the Mille Miglia, Ferrari. The Mille Miglia was a race the likes of which will never... Aside from their national aspirations, the international capabilities of a major motor manufacturer were now being shop-windowed through the Le Mans 24-hour race. Jaguar's interest in the race, becoming winners of it for the first time in 1951, attracted much attention, particularly in the United States. This is an important export market for Alfa Romeo, so this was seen as an important venue for Alfa in which to succeed. The Disco Volante had been intended to do just that. It was entered in the 1953 race, but the car fell by the wayside. That effectively brought about the end of Alfa Romeo in sports car racing. Alfa Romeo became a major manufacturer and concentrated on building road cars with a sporting flavour rather than outright sports cars as they had done in the 1920s and 30s. Alfa confined their racing to touring cars and GT races in the 1960s. This is the 1965 Sandown 6-hour endurance race.
This time the two offside tyres are changed, brake pads inspected and fuel added. Mildren takes off the relief driver sticker. The drivers compare notes. Gardner is in and away in 150. At 5 hours, the TI is first by 6 laps, and car 31 is 1 lap ahead of the Moffat-Palmer Lotus. But the passing hours and the pace is being felt by a lot of cars. For many of the bigger cars, handling has become a problem. With their brakes worn to metal, they're overshooting the corners. Many have changed brake pads and linings. The Reed Stewart Triumph 2000 is blowing smoke and sounding sick, but some people seem to have lost interest in the race. 3 minutes to go and the TI seems late. Glen Abbey looks back up the straight. But here he is, and a relieved Mildren gives the last pit signal. Mildren checks with the timekeepers just to make sure. But it's 5 o'clock, and the checkered flag is out waiting for Gardner and the TI. Frank Gardner crosses the line 6 hours, 1 minute, 1.2 seconds, and 462 miles after he left the grid. Now the strain is off the Mildren pit. Gardner and Bartlett average 77 miles an hour for the 6 hours.
A victory for Frank Gardner and Kevin Bartlett in the Giulia TI.
Now the laurels of victory. For Gardner and Bartlett, a well-deserved win. The TI, Old Faithful, has won for the 2nd year in succession.
The 2-litre GTV was a major force in the early days of the European Touring Car Championship. It was this success that encouraged Alfa to come back to sports car racing. Once more they formed a works team, and the T33 Alfa eventually proved successful in the World Sports Car Championship. Full works participation saw them win the championship, albeit after the departure of Porsche. By now, Formula One had changed greatly from 1951, and Alfa decided they needed to return. At first, they provided an engine from March, and surprisingly, a deal was done to replace the Cosworth engine in the back of Bernie Eccleston's Brabhams. Eccleston had bought the company from Ron Turinac and was seeking to have first call on a factory engine. Although the BT46 was fast, it wasn't always terribly reliable. drivers John Watson and Hans Stuck were initially able to give a good account of themselves, and Watson nearly won the British Grand Prix in 1976. But victory eventually went to James Hunt. The writing was on the wall for Niki Lauda at Ferrari, so he joined Brabham for 1978. And this was after his second World Championship for Ferrari in 1977. Brabham's designer was a young South African, Gordon Murray, and he was studying the development of ground effect cars. Colin Chapman, with Peter Wright, had designed the first ground effect car. It was an extremely effective design, and over in America there was an alternative developed by Jim Hall, the Chaparral, in 1970. This required a second engine to provide the ground effect suction at the back of the car. It was studied carefully by Gordon Murray, who designed a Formula One car using the same principles. The lack of time was a problem, but it was the loss of the driver Carlos Pache in an aeroplane accident which placed the team under pressure. The arrival of Niki Lauda was a welcome boost to the team. The car made its debut in the Swedish Grand Prix at Understorp. The BT46B was immediately successful, fast in practice and showing the way round to the opposition. At the start, the Brabham was closely followed by Mario Andretti's Lotus. There was a problem which no one had thought of. The fans in the Brabham scattered stones and rubber over the whole of the circuit. Many of the other competitors complained, so although the car won the race, it was something of a Pyrrhic victory. After the race, representations were made to the governing body of motorsport, and the Brabham fan car was consigned to the museum. Brabham continued to challenge for World Championship honours during the year with a more conventional car. There was one more important victory for the Alfa Romeo Brabham team. This was at Monza in 1978. But it was to be a sad event. The death of the Swedish driver Ronnie Peterson followed this fiery accident at the start. The race was stopped. From the restart, the Brabham Alfa was dominant and it went on to win the Italian Grand Prix. Under any other circumstances, this would have been a very popular victory for Niki Lauda, but John Watson finished second. There was just one more win for the Brabham Alfa Romeo team at Imola. After this, a parting of the ways came about, and Eccleston decided that turbocharging was the way to go, and turned to the 1.5-litre BMW turbo engine. Meanwhile, Alfa Romeo had decided to go it alone with their own Grand Prix car. This didn't prove to be as successful as Alfa Romeo would have hoped, and while they came close, they weren't able to win a race. Alfa withdrew from Grand Prix racing at the end of 1985, but their link with motor racing has never really stopped. In the early 1990s, an Alfa Romeo team decided that the German Touring Car Championship was the ideal showroom for their saloon cars. The DTM cars were high-tech four-wheel drive cars that competed initially in Germany, and then the series spread right across Europe. Alfa had success in 1993 when Nicola Larini won the championship in the 155 V6 Ti. Since then, Alfa Romeo have competed successfully in 2-litre Super Touring and most recently in the European Touring Car Championship. With Fiat now the owners of Alfa Romeo, Maserati and Ferrari, it's unlikely that they will ever again compete against each other in Grand Prix racing. However, the name Alfa Romeo will always have a romance and a special place in the hearts of enthusiasts around the world.